AI. It seems like it's everywhere you turn these days, right? Always some new thing about how AI is going to revolutionize our lives.
Yeah.
But while we're all thinking about, AI writing our emails or composing symphonies or whatever, there's kind of a less glamorous side to all this, and that's its impact on the planet. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the energy consumption of AI, especially the kind that can generate text and images like ChatGPT or DALL-E. We're going to uncover the hidden environmental costs of all this digital wizardry.
Yeah, it is really interesting how we just sort of get caught up in like the potential of AI and all the problems it could solve and all these, efficiencies it could create. But we never really stop to think about like what it takes to actually power these algorithms, the sheer amount of energy consumed behind the scenes.
So let's unpack that a little. When I was reading up on this, and I was actually kind of surprised to learn how much energy goes into just training these models.
Yeah.
And it's not just plugging in your laptop, right? We're talking about huge data centers just filled with computers, crunching numbers 24/7. What's the environmental impact of all that computing power?
Well, even training like a relatively small AI model can produce as much carbon emissions as like 125 round-trip flights between New York and Beijing. And then you start to think about models like GPT-3, which is like 800 times larger, or Google's Bard, and you start to see like the scale of the energy consumption that we're talking about.
125 flights for a small model. That's kind of crazy.
Mhm.
And these models aren't trained just like once, right?
No, not at all. Most of them go through like multiple rounds of training to try and reach like optimal accuracy. So you're basically multiplying that impact many times over for each model.
So you got the models themselves just guzzling energy during training.
Yeah.
But then they need a place to live, right? Some kind of digital home,
Mm.
which is where the cloud comes in, I guess.
Exactly. The models mainly reside in data centers, which are basically just massive facilities packed with servers. That's the backbone of the cloud. And to keep all of those servers running 24/7 and keep them from overheating, these centers consume a truly crazy amount of energy and water for both cooling and maintenance.
So how much are we actually talking about here? Like, is there a way to put the scale of the energy consumption of these data centers in perspective?
Well, picture a country like South Africa and all the electricity it uses. That's roughly what data centers around the world are consuming right now. And projections are saying that it could exceed Japan's total energy consumption by 2030. And, Japan is the world's third largest economy.
Wow, okay, that really puts things in perspective. So are we basically on track for an energy crisis just because of all of this AI stuff?
Yeah, it's a real concern. At a recent global semiconductor conference, one of the predictions was that global computing demand could outstrip total world electricity generation within the next decade. So it's not just about keeping the lights on at that point.
That's a pretty sobering thought. So we know the energy used by the AI models themselves is a big issue, but there's also the impact of creating the hardware itself, right? Like all those powerful chips.
Absolutely. You're hitting on a very important point. Those chips, often produced by companies like, TSMC and NVIDIA, they don't just appear out of thin air. Their production comes with a significant environmental price tag.
What makes these places so resource intensive?
Well, a typical chip fabrication plant uses about the same amount of electricity as a town of 50,000 people. And that's not even counting the millions of gallons of ultra-pure water that are used daily for cooling and cleaning during manufacturing.
It's like you're building a small city just to create the brains of these AIs.
Yeah.
And the demand for those chips is only going to increase as AI gets more powerful and more widespread.
Exactly. The push for bigger, more powerful models, the expansion of cloud infrastructure, the need for more chips, it all just intensifies the pressure on the planet.
Yeah.
And that means increased carbon emissions from energy consumption, a strain on clean energy sources, and depletion of water resources, all just to keep up with the sort of relentless pursuit of more powerful AI.
It's easy to get a little overwhelmed by all of this,
Yeah.
but is there anything positive happening? Is the tech industry at least aware of this problem, or are we just heading for an AI-powered ecological disaster?
There's definitely a growing awareness that you can't just keep building bigger and more powerful AI without thinking about the consequences. It's kind of like, realizing that you've been driving a gas-guzzling SUV when a smaller car would have been just fine.
So are there any real concrete steps being taken toward making AI more sustainable?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Companies like Microsoft and Google, for instance, have made pledges to shift their cloud infrastructure to what they call green clouds.
What does that mean?
Well, it basically means using renewable energy sources like solar and wind power to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. They're also working on improving energy efficiency within data centers, trying to get more computing power out of the same amount of energy.
That's good to hear. But are there any ways to deal with the environmental impact of individual AI models? Like beyond just these company-wide things?
I think transparency is really important. Imagine if every time someone created a new AI model, they had to calculate and then disclose its carbon footprint, like, a nutrition label on food.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, it would help people understand the environmental cost of using that model, and it would encourage developers to think about efficiency and sustainability in the design and training process.
So instead of just, using whatever the most powerful AI is, we could actually compare and choose based on their carbon footprint.
Exactly. And it would incentivize developers to think about energy efficiency right from the start. So you might start to see a new generation of greener AI as a result.
Okay, so we've got these green clouds and these carbon footprint labels. Anything else? It feels like we need some out-of-the-box thinking here.
Absolutely. Right. There's actually some really cool stuff happening in the area of right-sizing AI models.
Right sizing, what's that?
Well, the idea is that instead of always going for the biggest and most complex model, you figure out what the task is, and then you choose the model that can do it with the least amount of energy.
So like instead of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You find the right tool for the job. It's more strategic and more thoughtful. It addresses both the sustainability concerns and the need for efficient AI solutions. So it's a win-win.
Are there other examples of this kind of innovative thinking in terms of reducing AI's energy consumption?
Yeah, for sure. Some companies are looking at training AI models in places that have a lot of renewable energy, like, wind or solar farms, so that they can reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Other companies are experimenting with specialized data centers that are designed specifically for lower energy consumption. And there's even research going on into tweaking the training protocols themselves to make them less resource intensive.
So it seems like there's a real shift happening in the whole AI community, right? From just focusing on bigger and faster to actually thinking about sustainability and responsibility.
I think so, yeah.
But is this just happening in, big tech companies in the developed world? Or are there similar efforts happening elsewhere?
No, it's definitely a global movement. In India, for example, companies like NTT and Airtel are powering their data centers with their own captive solar plants. So they're significantly reducing their carbon footprint.
That's great. And what about that company C3LS? I saw something about them the other day.
Oh yeah, CrewTrail-S. They've managed to become the world's first LAE Platinum certified green data center, which is a really big deal. It means they've met some really rigorous standards for things like energy efficiency and water conservation and sustainable materials. So they've basically set a new standard for what a sustainable data center can look like.
So these are all great examples. But this seems like a much bigger issue than just what individual companies are doing. What about the role of governments and communities in all of this? How can we promote sustainable AI development on a larger scale?
You're absolutely right. It's not just about companies doing their part. Governments and communities need to be involved as well. They need to work together to create policies and regulations and incentives that encourage responsible development and deployment of AI.
So what can governments actually do to make sure that AI grows in a way that doesn't hurt the environment?
Well, one thing they could do is create policies that reward companies for adopting sustainable practices, like, give tax breaks to companies that power their data centers with renewable energy, or fund research into energy-efficient AI models and training methods.
Right. So it's about making it easier and cheaper for companies to do the right thing.
Exactly. And governments could also set standards for data center energy efficiency, kind of like, fuel efficiency standards for cars, push the whole industry toward better designs and practices.
And what about the communities where all these data centers and fabs are located? What can they do?
Communities have a big stake in this, and their voices need to be heard. They're the ones who are going to be dealing with the impact of these facilities. So, things like increased demand on the local energy grid, or pressure on water resources, or even just noise and air pollution from these facilities.
So how can communities get involved and make sure their concerns are addressed?
I think the most important thing is transparency. Governments and tech companies need to be open about what they're doing and engage with communities. Explain, what the potential impact of these facilities might be, and get input from community members before anything is built.
Right. So it's not about saying no to AI development. It's about making sure that it happens responsibly and sustainably.
Exactly. And with the well-being of those communities in mind.
It seems like AI is here to stay, and it's only going to get more integrated into our lives.
Yeah.
How do we balance that with protecting the planet?
That's the big question, right? We
Yeah.
can't just stop AI development. It has so much potential to improve things, but we also can't just ignore the environmental consequences. So it's about finding that sweet spot that balance between progress and sustainability.
And a big part of that seems to be changing how we think about technology, right? Like moving away from this idea that bigger is always better.
Totally. We need to start asking ourselves, do we really need the most powerful AI for this task? Or could we get the same results with a smaller, more efficient model? It's about understanding the trade-offs.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation. It seems like the future of AI, and maybe even the future of the planet, depends on the choices we make right now. So what's the one thing you want people to take away from this?
The main takeaway, I think, is that we all have a role to play in this. We're not powerless. As individuals, as communities, as a global society, we have a voice and we have a responsibility to make sure that AI is used for good. And that includes protecting the planet. We need to stay informed and ask questions and demand better from both the tech industry and our governments. The future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something that we create through the decisions we make every day.
So it's a call to action,
Right.
basically. A reminder that we can all make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into AI and the environment. We hope this has inspired you to learn more and to use your voice to advocate for a more sustainable future for AI.